describe to me spiritual materialism, and that will be our launching point.
And this is, I don't know who coined this phrase, and this is just from random Wikipedia journeys, I'm sure. But the notion, as I understood it, was, say if you're a monk and there is a certain level of enlightenment, a certain spiritual state that you're trying to attain for yourself, that you are, just like one could be materialistic about a car or their possessions, that this is spiritual materialism. Now, this becoming a certain spiritual way is the new thing that they are lusting after. And that is, the whole goal is to not be lusting to begin with, right? So it's, I'm very wary about, identifying as anything. Because I just think it's a slippery slope, and that we kind of I think of how just everything about a person can be commodified these days, and how I think there are there are these issues like I was talking about spiritual materialism vis-a-vis like wokeness, right? And where it's I think it's very easy because of social media to be visible in one's opinion, which is very different from like doing anything or being anything, right? You're just saying, "Hey, I'm this," and I'm not saying I haven't been guilty of that, and I think at times everybody makes mistakes. But that's one thing that, just reading that phrase and that concept and just kind of sitting with that for a little bit, it's like, I think there's a lot of ways that the ways in which we think about ourselves exist to just kind of, what's the word? Just make us feel better about our own behavior without actually changing it, And so, that's one of the things I'm always trying. And I don't know if this is just a compulsive, I'm, like I said, I don't ascribe to any one religion or philosophy, but I'm very much interested in like trying to live both right and well, if that is possible, right? As well as I can. And that's maybe a tall order, especially if you're like, well, I'm not going to any of these major structures of religion. I think they all have beautiful things to say, and they, I love all of them, but I don't think I can use a structure. I think I have to just I think it just has to be what are you doing now? And are you doing the right thing now? So, I'm very wary about, I advocate, for all kinds of local, I keep an eye on local politicians since the last few years. Maybe that's just like me getting old and, I don't have a family, so I don't have anybody to like yell at. And I'm like, okay. So there's a lot of, changes that I think happen that I don't think get a lot of attention. And so, a lot of the stuff that I focus my time on when I'm not, making music or, if I'm just reading up on things, is I think of, recent legislation that is just whatever your gender is, if it isn't male or female, there is just such a huge problem in people's minds. And I just I don't know why that is for the life of me. Because I'm like, here's the thing about that. Your gender doesn't really affect me in any way. My gender doesn't really affect you in any way, unless there's like specific context, or it doesn't have to, right? And so I have had dear friends now that I have seen go through various stages of transitioning, and I some of the proudest feelings I've ever had about another person, right? Mm-hmm. When and I can think of one of them where I didn't see them. Actually, a couple of them where I didn't see them for a significant amount of time, and so you just knew that was maybe in their future, and then just kind of lose touch. Then you come back and like, wow, like you look fantastic, and it's like you're not, it's like different, but like I feel like just and I just, it blows my mind that people are against that. I'm like, if people are modifying their bodies in every which way, I'm like, I don't know why is this, I don't, so it gets me very upset. And so but again, it's like that is, I because of these getting exposed to things like spiritual materialism, this notion that, I don't even know where I picked it up, but it was just like, well, hey, that's not your struggle. So you have to be careful what you say about that. Right. Like I'm hesitant to identify as anything, but like my experiences thus far have all been heterosexual. So it's like, I can't just be like, yeah, I advocate for this with, and then, can't show up and be the guy that's speaking the loudest. Yeah. And so that's the kind of, that when I see that spiritual materialism in that context taken to the extreme, that's the, when you see these Raytheon with the rainbow logo, it's like, hey, we're making missiles, making missiles to bomb people, but doing it in the name of gay pride. I'm like, okay, like that's, this wokeness has become meaningless, right?
Yeah. So in the absence of any sort of structural religious foundation that kind of this side of culture tends to have, that it does seem like a lot of people either came out of religion in some way, and so we don't have as much of a foundation in a sort of cultural and moral framework. But then also even people who didn't grow up in religion, but in a way, people that grow up without religion also kind of grow up against religion, because those are the kinds of parents that kind of do that.
Right. Sometimes you get a counterexample instead of an example.
Yeah. And so in the absence of any sort of religious community, humans, I feel, tend to kind of look for them anyways. And so wokeness in some regard has become a religion for those of us without religion. And it has, there's a sort of zealotry that is involved in it. And so political activism, you can feel really good about it whenever you achieve something, and real things are being achieved with it. But also it can be equated to that same thing that you feel whenever you have a really good worship experience in a church. And I mean, I grew up Catholic as well, and had been, in Oklahoma, you experience a lot of the variety of different religious experiences, and a similar thing can be experienced whenever you're at a religious, or not religious, a activism sort of space. And so that kind of spiritual materialism can surface in places outside of spiritual specific places. And it does feel as though, there is a lot of good intent behind it. And then it gets corrupted in some way, in some form along the way.
Yes. And that's, I guess that's when I say, like, I nothing is ever 100% good and not 100% bad. I think that's like somehow inherent in like human behavior somehow. I don't know how to explain it, but like, that's just one of my suspicions about like the way the universe operates at large. Because I think every movement, you can't get anything done as an individual. And so every movement is necessarily going to have a spectrum of people that vary, right? Because people are not the same in any way, and then because of that, you're inherently going to have some number that splits off into some faction, and it's just always going to be messy. which is why, I don't want to ever be a part of like a club. I guess I want to be like, I want to like help the old lady across the street. Yeah. That's really all it is. Like if there is a deed in my path that I can do good, then I want to be, like, okay, like here's my time to do that. And a lot of the times, because it's hard to know how to contribute or how to affect change. And so I look to the people who have more problems than I have in my day-to-day life. And, I have, and one of the, I was raised Catholic, and I think a lot of that, whether you want to or not, whether you wind up Catholic or not, sticks with you. And I think I really do look, I think because of something I took from that, I look for like, well, who's got their arms open and who's got their hands out, right? Or maybe not hands out, but who's saying, yes, you're welcome here, and who's saying you're not welcome here. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I have been in like a queer space where it was just like, it doesn't matter who you are, you're welcome here, right? And I can't tell you how many times I have been in spaces where I have seen queer people be very much not welcomed. And I just like, I don't know how anybody that read the Gospels could be like, that's, or like what do they call the Beatitudes? I'm like, well, okay, all right. So I think that's where I don't ever want to identify with a religion, because I think it's they all get distorted somehow. They all, and I think that's because there's human actors in them, and every human is subject to their flaws, and sure. So it's just everything comes out messy.
Yeah, I don't know if there's some form of decentralized morality structure, like, and in some ways religion tried doing that. Like even Christianity specifically, before it became an institution, was this cult effectively of people doing good things, and historically, and like acts
or that at least things they defined as good, right?
But they created these communities that were good and weren't contingent on belief, but just were doing good things. And that sort of decentralized moral behavior was there. But then I don't know if is it inevitable that any sort of structure perpetuates and then
here's what I think happened. Okay. Somewhere in the, post-war era, right? Because I think that queerness has always been here, and intersex people have always been here. And so I think that this became, as these issues became politicized, I think somewhere in this post-war era of American politics, we became more concerned with our identities than like with what happens in the world, right? It's like, I don't, I think of the support our troops stick-on ribbons, right? Where it's like, maybe there's some argument to be made that like there's 99 cents that gets donated somewhere, but I what are those troops doing that we're supporting? And do we, I'm not saying that it's bad or good what they're doing, but why is it bad that you question it? That is very suspect to me, right? So anyways, I'm getting off track. I think there was this focus on the individual identity, and I think what happened there was the people in power always only saw it as men and women, and well, as long as it's that way, and we're making all the money, and they're in the kitchen doing their woman stuff, making food and whatever, then life's great. And I think I just, that has never reflected my experience with women or with men in the world. You know, I'm like, I don't see a clear correlation between what types of interests or behavior or activities you like. And, you know, it all just seems made up to me. And I'm like, this is just, it's just shorthand. It's convenient to say this is male and this is female. Like, I think, you know, the whole thing is just kind of this made up game that we play. Right. But because we need to refer to stuff and we have to be in this material world communicating, you have to have the words, and people associate the words with that identity. And so now we've got the politicization of these pronouns, and, you know, all hell breaking loose, and trying to keep people out of certain sports. And, you know, again, all I think of is, you know, if I break this down to how I feel as like the little boy inside of me, this little Christian boy, it's like, well, Jesus had his arms open. He didn't push people out. I don't feel like it's any more complicated than that. And like, I don't identify as Christian anymore, but I feel like anybody that does, how do you be against anybody based on anything, you know? You know, I think the same way with crime. What we define as crime has largely more to do with how much capital you had access to by your birth, you know, which and a lot of the time is dependent on, you know, the several generations before you, where you come from, or you know, what access those generations had to capital. So, you know, I feel like so much of it is this like crapshoot, but people like to think they're self-made. I don't know.
Yeah. This is the first time I'm kind of having this thought. So this is interesting that power, or those in power, like structure because structure is controllable, right? You put water in a cup and you can control the water, but if the water is not in the cup, you can't actually hold it with your hands very well. Right. And so the current institutions don't have a way of structuring the whatever freedom of gender expression that is happening. And so they just see that as a loss of power, right?
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you why they see that as a loss of power, right? We are seeing this shift from, you know, I think everybody was raised with this notion that like America is a democracy and the power comes from the people. And that's a beautiful idea. But what, you know, is becoming more and more apparent is that there have always been enormous swaths of wealth, and all laws over time have bent towards that wealth. And I think they bend harder and faster the larger that wealth gets. And that the origins of that wealth are not pretty, I will tell you that. And I think it's silly to think that any, like that wealth was somehow American, right? Like that, you know, this case for reparations to me is like, I'm like, no, like mathematically, guys, I don't know how you don't get it. Like, this is stolen labor from stolen people that you got from another place. Like, so, you know, I get very upset about these things. And again, it's like, these aren't my struggles, right? So try to be careful about, you know, what I let upset me. Sorry, I've gotten off topic.
No, you're good. But that, I mean, that of just what power tends towards, I think is one thing you were alluding to. And so this always ends up happening.
Why? Okay, why that transition? I guess what's happening is they need to control these people that they don't understand in terms of what we're saying is it's not the people are the source of the power. The people are like, I think, basically labor. They're like fuel. We're like the more any way that you can make them poor and make their life harder, you are making them more dependent on their job. And I think right now, I don't think I have ever seen evidence to the contrary that the powers that create laws in this country are beholden to anything but capital. I think they, for a period, might have used religion as a way to sway people, and maybe some of those people bought into their own propaganda a little bit. But I don't think I don't think that there's like a positive aim behind this nation at large, right? I think it's a money machine that no one is in control of. It has gotten out of control, and it's creating these like monster billionaires, and I don't like the looks of that. If that answers whatever the question was.
Sure. It always kind of comes back to this for some reason for me, but a question I tend to ask in the previous podcast, but do you believe in free will, or just free will ?
Yeah, it's a lovely question, and it's an age old, it's a classic, right? I believe that it definitely feels like I have some, so when I say what I really refer to is not like a body. It's like feels like there's something looking through peepholes, and this all just happens. I never see the back of my head. I'm just like stuck in this mask of experience.
The you is the thing behind your eyes.
Yeah. And, I think that it feels like I'm capable of making decisions and influencing the world, but I think it also is very apparent that the world influences me back in ways that I'm still just now getting a language to even understand how, where once you kind of, at least in my experience, I kind of grew up and, for me, it was learning, what's his name? Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. Right over there. Where it's like I knew, I was exposed in college, to a teacher who really changed my life. And honestly, I don't know how I have not brought her up this far. She is probably the, center most intellectual influence on my life. But her name is Dr. Catherine John. She's Jamaican born, got her doctorate, I believe, on the East Coast in Boston somewhere. And I'm bad with universities and degrees and all of these facts. But I wound up in one of her classes at OU, and she just, she was a person that like, I knew I was looking for something. I knew, I never felt like I was being given the full story. I felt like when I had questions that were too big, nobody could answer them. And I just didn't feel like like the world in my immediate surrounding was just too perfect to that something was missing, right? And her classes were, I think, the first like, yeah. So if you haven't been outside of the U.S. a whole lot and you haven't seen a lot of other things, it's like this might be kind of a ride. Sure. And there's things in there like there's a book, I don't remember the exact title, but like how the IMF, it's like how the IMF bankrupted, huge parts of the world. I don't remember the name of the title, but it just, I'm bad with economic systems. I don't have a like firm academic grasp of any of this anymore, but she introduced me to this notion of like, there's a geopolitical system. And that's why history is interesting. It's not like the stories of these guys and these battles. It's like these power plays are still affecting us, and the struggle has never ended. And really, most people have never known a fraction of the freedom that I personally have known. And I'm still upset about the things that I don't feel, even if it's not me, people that are my peers that I love don't consider free. So. She, really introduced me to, post-colonialism. I took Afro-Caribbean literature course with her. I took, she had a hip hop as literature course that I was dying to take, but never got to take with her. African-American film class. She had just really laid out, just all of the things that you kind of don't get in the sort of mainstream history, and there was something that, I was like, this is what, like, how it just feels so urgent to learn this stuff. And like, you know, and then you tell people about it and they're kind of like, oh yeah, that's crazy. And that's, but I'm like, no, like, you know, I think of that, you know, this is maybe a little extreme, but I'm, you know, I don't really think so anymore. But there's that, that sketch. I can't remember if it was Fry and Laurie or, a Peep Show guys, where, you know, they're the like Nazi soldiers and it's just occurring to them. They're like, wait, are we the baddies?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you know, if you look at the history of conflicts that we've been in, and like, what were the economic stakes behind all of these? You know, where are those weapons of mass destruction? You know, what happened with that? Like, you know, over time, you're like, it's all garbage. I don't really, you know, I've completely lost faith in our political system to do anything but serve corporate interests, you know, and the more I learn about the history, I don't think it was ever really about anything else. Except
nudge you back towards free will here.
Oh yeah. So all of that to say, I think that was kind of what did it for me. Was I felt like that kind of put my life in a different context, where now suddenly, you know, I think, and it took a while for all that to sink in. But before that, I was kind of aimless, and I wouldn't have had any idea, free will or not. It didn't seem to matter at the time. It was just like, there was lots of stuff I was interested in, but I just felt kind of tortured and pointless. And, you know, and so there's lots of drug usage, and, you know, a lot of great things happened too in that period. But, you know, as I'm older, I do think that we all have free will. And I think the whole point of life is, to use that free will for the good of everybody. Or what else is the point of being here? I think of that Toni Morrison quote of, you know, this is not a candy game, is I think what she said. Just like, no, you idiot. Like, if you have privilege, like, you should, you know, it comes from someplace. And where does it come from? It's your responsibility to look into that and figure out where it comes from. And you should probably try to make sure that it comes from a good place. And if it's not coming from a good place, then you should probably try to set up a way to transition that to a good place.
Sure.
So I think we have free will. I think the point of free will is exactly that.
Sure. So I don't believe in free will, and the way that we look at power structures sort of changes from that perspective. And so the systems have emergent properties that create tendencies within them. And so this is just like a thread that keeps coming up in my life, and I keep just using it to explain everything.
There is a song in a Google Drive folder that I have titled Emergent Phenomena. So I feel you.
And the way that systems are structured, like what you said about how when you look at history, there's a geopolitical trend that is going. And I think that because of the emergent properties that happen within systems, the same thing that happens whenever a clump of cells becomes a cancer, or whenever a clump of cells becomes just an organ, and the things that happen from there. And so we think that we've finished upward grouping on like governments or countries or whatever, but it just like keeps going. And so the emergent intelligence that appears from corporations or just governments or whatever power structures that we find ourselves in have their emergent properties, their tendencies that move in ways that are not immediately recognizable to us, but the way that these systems are structured do end up benefiting those people in power. And so to look at systems without free will allows us instead to analyze the systems themselves rather than the actors within them.
Wait, say that again.
To look at systems in the absence of free will allows us to analyze the systems themselves instead of the actors within them.
Yeah, okay.
And so you could say that, oh, Vladimir Putin is just an evil asshole or something, or that there is a whole structure of things that go far beyond Vladimir Putin himself.
Has a huge history that's impossible to learn in the, 2 weeks since this broke out?
Yeah.
So maybe you don't have an opinion about it that you broadcast.
Yeah, and I don't. So.
Yeah, and so many people do. And I, and it's infuriating. But sorry, you were going somewhere with free will.
So you can't look at just the situation or any situation of politics or power or whatever without also seeing the things inherent in the system that create those tendencies anyways. And so why would Vladimir Putin want more land? Why would the United States use United Fruit to like colonize all of South America all over again? It goes beyond the individuals in the system or the ones that are supposedly in power of things, because it exists outside of them. It is a sort of meta intelligence that exists beyond us and intergenerationally as well.
How does that conflict with free will is my question. Because I agree with all that.
Sure. That we are the products of environment and genes, and so I think free will allows us to think we can punish and have this concept of deserving. and so if you steal and you know that stealing is bad, then you are bad and you made a bad decision.
Still agree with you.
Or many things in life contributed to, and it's very difficult to just start speaking about actions and things happening outside of the way that language is structured around free will. So here's a ridiculous sentence. There are many things that contributed to what led that individual to be forced to do something that is against the law in order to survive, which is just a very long-winded way of saying they had to steal.
And I'm still with you. I still think that can all be true, and that free will, I think that even if you have no other choice, that you're still making an action. I think that there is a free will. Because I think that, so I guess I have to address multiple things in what you just said here. And I'm trying to kind of formulate it. But I think what you're saying about this notion of the way capital moves, the way corporations move, and how there's this meta layer. I think you're absolutely right that not only does it obfuscate a certain morality and a certain covers up decision making, but it's designed to do that on purpose. Yeah. Right. I don't think that means there's no free will. I think that just means pieces of shit that have the ability to do that decided to do that, and now we all have less agency because of that. Right. I don't.
Do you think those people in power have a choice? Do you think an Exxon executive has the choice to pull out?
I think I don't think that they don't have the choice. I think that by nature of being in that position, they are making the choice that they would make, right? If you were born...
Now you're growing beyond the linguistic limitations of free will.
Well, and maybe that sounds more deterministic, but I think that we're a combination of a combination of nature and nurture, right? That we are. It's impossible to tell the difference between how I affect my environment and how my environment affects me, because everything's messy, nothing is, language is neat little cubbyhole things, but life isn't like that. I think that you can grow up to be, and I think that's, I kind of believe in, at least as a thought exercise, this notion of radical empathy, where you pick, somebody like Donald Trump and be like, how did he get that way?
Yeah.
And, I didn't finish it because I just didn't care enough about him as a man. But I started to read his aunt or whoever it was, Mary Trump, her book, just because I was just so mad, I was like, oh, why? And how could this person exist? And now he's in charge. And, and I wanted to just understand. I was like, well, what if he just needs something? What if he's just which I think that, I don't think there's a fixing that. So don't get me wrong. But, you see, it's almost, kind of predictable. His rough childhood and, he was the ways that he was treated, he now treats others. I think that it doesn't excuse his behavior, but I also don't think the thing for free will about free will is I think it's very easy to go with the flow of the status quo, with the habit of living. But you always have the option to break that habit. And I think you always have, I'm just the other day celebrated 14 months without a cigarette. Right. And that's very hard to make that decision, because you don't just make that decision once. That's God knows how many times I've quit. But you make that decision every time the idea comes up. You're just like, oh shit, great, World War III is happening. I want nothing more than a cigarette right now, but that's not who I am anymore. And I don't even believe in being a thing, but who I am now is a person in the moment that thinks about a cigarette and says no. That's how that's all I can define myself in one moment, and that's it. And I think that if I think that if I could do that, I don't know. I don't know why that would happen without free will. I think it's just that it's so. I think that people's agency is just that limited. Is my caveat here? I'm not trying to say that the person who's stealing ought to be punished because they made a choice. The person who made it, not that is a person, right? Because it's this meta thing. It's this Ouija board that prevents us from blaming anybody of circumstances that make somebody homeless to begin with, right? When really, I think it's no, I think it's clear what makes people unhoused is we have these systems that we're not keeping corporations across the board seeing these record profits and cutting the amount they're paying their workers. We have a system that just it's unregulated. And in just basic ways. I'm not an economist. I'm not even a politics guy. I just care about certain things. And lately I'm if nobody else is going to give a shit about local politics, it's you have to at least keep an eye on what's happening, because I don't trust the local news or the New York Times even to report anything honestly anymore.
Sure. Something that I feel is a common misunderstanding in my stance of free will or lack thereof is that there is an assumed lack of accountability. And I just don't think that's true. So
how do you mean?
People assume that if you don't believe in free will, then people can't be held accountable because they didn't make that choice or whatever. And it's that's not necessarily.
You can still, if the guy doesn't have a choice, you can still throw him in jail.
Right. And so, and I think that's the thing that we need to analyze systems and structures through that lens rather than through a sort of
I 100% agree with that
moral agency sort of point of view. And so I think that if someone is just murdering people, then they do need to be neutralized so that they stop murdering people. And then we can deal with the rest of it.
Yeah. I see. Okay. So I agree with most of what you're saying. And I think this is a difference.
I will also clarify that neutralize does not mean to kill or whatever, but to literally make neutral.
I agree that I think we have been conditioned to look at the systems of power in this world, I'll say, in a certain lens that focuses on the individual. I mean, look at how we think of climate change, right?
Yeah.
Are you using straws? Motherfucker, I don't make straws. I don't make straws by the gross to the 10th degree and supply them to every restaurant in America. I'm not the problem. I'm not, a corporation that's dumping oil anywhere. I don't have a, million gallons of oil somewhere to spill into the Gulf. And I think that is true very much on just like every level, right? I think in terms of crime, I think seeing it through this lens of the system tends to punish people who are in these circumstances rather than, and again, this is like rather than looking at as a person as an identity, you're looking at a person as a complex history of, which again, this is like the flaw with language. One of the things I really, this has been time and time again, just a theme in my life is the inadequacy of language. But yeah, this because we have to put everything in this weird cloud-like meta structure that absolves us of all individual guilt. Well, that only works one way, right? It only works upwards. And the power structure, it never benefits the little guy, right? It never benefits the poor person. It never benefits anybody that isn't like, straight and white and male and all of these things, right? So I guess while I agree that I think that I don't agree with the underlying presumption of well, that person didn't have free will, because I think that's, and again, this is I'm coming from a place of privilege, so I'm open to whatever. But coming from the background, when I try to think as an artist of what can I bring to the world is, now that I'm wow, I was raised and, what I really see is it's a settler colony. This is this was land that was taken and then people were wiped out. And this, we just live here. So it's everybody thought it was cool. Nobody was oh, that was bad. Maybe we should do something about it. And till present day, until, so I'm living here. I'm not doing anything about it. And that gives me all of these well, what can I do? Right. And what I believe, is dependent on, or this notion of having free will is that I just need to testify honestly about what it is that I've seen and what is so bothersome about it, because it is very bothersome to me. And it's bothersome that, I have this tenuous relationship with my family because they're worried about bringing up a certain political thing or something. And I'm it's not, I'm not here to yell at anybody. But, also if somebody says something that I disagree with, sometimes I get upset, so I think that it's critical for the people that are in my position, right? When you are on not even the tippity top of the privilege spectrum, but if yours up there, right? I think you have to realize that it's not that they couldn't physically make another choice, that they were forced into stealing something. It's no, they decided to steal. It was a better option to steal. That if you were there, you would have stolen. I was an English major. Because I think everybody hears about a crime and their first thought is oh, that'd never be me. And I'm well, if you had a child and that child hadn't eaten in 3 days and you were in a Walmart and the guy wasn't looking and there's a loaf of bread, you let your child starve? Are you evil? The system that governs the human body and families and love, to me, far supersedes the system of capital and Walmart's rules. But we are so ingrained with those systems that they have infringed upon the human systems. And so that's where I don't want it to be, I don't want us to ever look at the people that are getting arrested or the people that are getting handled horribly by law enforcement as less than human, even if it is a philosophical free agency thing, because they're human as fuck. Their deaths and their mishandling is real. But also, I just think it is really critical that like you can empathize with the guy stealing. Like if you can't do the thought experiment of being like, well, what if my personal complex history played out differently? What if I got, my parents' house got hit by a tornado and I didn't go to college? I was adopted. So I often think like, what if I just wound up just clean elsewhere? Could have happened to anybody, could have landed anywhere, and so there's a lot of, psychologically it's weird, like not Stockholm syndrome. I don't know what you call it, like survivor's guilt almost.
Sure.
Like I was just born as like won this like human lottery, and like why I don't know, and like what and I see these things like what can I put that into, what can I do with it? And I think it's critical for people that have that privilege see that they do have agency, because our agency, on whether you're privileged or not, I think our agency is largely restricted by the structures of power, and privilege is very relative. If you're a billionaire, you're the most privileged. But I think that there's got to be an acknowledgement of free will that, like, listen, there's going to come a time where, I don't know, there has to be a standing up to the structure of power, right? I don't think that we can continue making Jeff Bezos and like 4 other dudes like hyper wealthy while everybody else can't afford to like get their teeth fixed. But I think that we all make decisions and should be held accountable for our decisions. Just the systems that we do that right now in terms of law and how we define crime are all fucked up.
Sure. I guess something else to clarify is that an absence of free will does not mean an absence of value. That's something. And then that just because the level of apparent options are lesser in those that have less power doesn't mean that even those that have more power and have more quote unquote freedom, they also do not have free will. Is what I'm saying. And so it's more that what you were saying, the extreme empathy of putting yourself in anyone's shoes, whether it is a criminal or where it is a specific criminal in that of Donald Trump, and that you can sort of do that exercise and follow the equation of this is what came out of it. And so then the unfortunate part is also that like we have to face just like the purely logistical or pragmatic ways of arriving at this conclusion, which is, have you ever meditated?
Very much so.
And so like with Vipassana meditation specifically, you are focusing on the breath, you notice how thoughts arise, and then you try and refocus back to the breath. Have you ever been able to find the source of thoughts arising?
I mean, I would answer a fat no to that. But and
this is just like a funny example that people use to just like really like throw a big question mark into the free will thing. Right. And yeah, because if you do sit alone long enough and try not to think, it is truly impossible to just like not.
I think, it's like that. I think that notion is a red herring, that you're going to like sit down and until like you have some psychedelic experience or something. I'm like, no, the goal is like, you should just sit down, and like meditating is inherently, without, I think, some sort of insane experience, rewarding, right?
Yeah, it's just literally just being able to notice exactly where you are, and that's a really good thing to do. But like, yeah, so there's just kind of the base layer, I guess. But then as that keeps going up, I feel like we can find every which way that every decision was made, and we can, it's unfortunate bootstrap logic, but like the choices that you made are exactly the choices that you were going to make. I think it's something you actually said earlier about like an Exxon executive. And that's just the case every time. and so here's where an interesting bootstrap logic comes in, is that one, we should structure systems as though we did not have free will, so that we can better kind of guide behavior for everyone, not just those in power or without. And then that the choices that we make, again, language is weird, the choices that we make influence the environment for other people. And that also changes the kinds of choices that they are going to make. And so by us having this conversation and even talking about how structures and systems work in ways that benefit the powerful, actually make it more probable that the resulting choice that someone else would make would be that of something against the system. And so we're kind of adding coins to that bank so that it eventually weighs on the side of, hey, let's help people and not the self or something. And again, that's sort of bootstrap logic and sort of saying that like, make choices because we don't make choices.
I was definitely like, man, he's saying the word choice an awful lot for defending, and yeah, I agree with really, I think I agree with the effects of what you're saying, or like the but I think I just have seen too many, and maybe again, this is like the inadequacies of language. It's like, how do you define a choice or a decision, right? Sure. And like, if agency is a thing, is it binary, or is it do you have some agency and sometimes more agency and sometimes less agency? But I think like with all problems of language, because of a lack of better option, until you make a better way to talk about it, you use the existing language. Yeah. And
hence why I had to say choice so much.
Right. and in the way I see it, I very much, even if, because I have read a lot of things and pondered on this notion of, non-dualism, right? That, that my identifying with this meat suit, this body, just because I happen to be peeping through these peepholes, it doesn't necessarily mean I am this meat thing, right? So I think there's a lot of, you could break down what makes free will, am I actually deciding to do something, or is it just happening because it's the sum of both my actions and all of the actions that happen to me? And it's like, it's kind of 6 of 1, like either way, it feels like I get to choose the stuff that I do within a certain context, because, there's a lot of stuff that I can't afford to do, or there's a lot of stuff that I would do differently if I had different access to money, right? All of us probably would. Like, like if I got paid more, I'd probably be like, I should probably like go to a dentist more often. I should probably like, fix these like things that I haven't done in a long time. It's like, I've got like a tooth that like should have a crown on it that just doesn't have a crown. It's just been like a stump for, I don't know. I'm like, it's expensive
Yeah.
The world is scary right now. I'm not, I might need that money. There might be some, who knows,
Yeah.
Um,
So going all this back to like changing systems and like kind of activism and all this sort of thing, sure, is that I bring this perspective in order to say that rather than just saying this law doesn't need to be this law, it needs to be this law, we need to kind of look at it a little bit more differently. And so instead of just saying, yeah, people who are trans or non-binary should be able to like make choices in their lives about their own bodies. Sure. But then also looking at the systems that allow those in power to have that kind of power. And so like, how can we structure the system in such a way that they are not incentivized towards those decisions? And so we can make it to where the system sort of built in has a way of disincentivizing those kinds of decisions. And so how can we, instead of saying, whenever you pollute in this river, you pay a fine, it's instead like, whenever you pollute in this river, your tax rates go up. And every single time that you're caught doing it, it just keeps compounding. Sure. And so and that's just an example I just pulled out of my ass, but like, we can structure systems that discourage behavior in such a way that it doesn't matter whether or not there are good or bad actors behaving within it, but simply the system itself creates a river that is the behavior that we're trying to flow towards.
Yeah. I think that essentially, I mean, you're talking about like, absolutely redesigning an economic model, I think, and yes, and legal model, and I think, this comes back to my problem is I used to read a lot. These days, I don't read as much. And I feel like now it's like, so I kind of remember certain stuff and I never feel like I can credit anybody correctly. So I just feel like an asshole all the time. But I know in reading about anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism, it's like I never got didn't feel like I needed to read super deep into that because I just felt like there's cool ideas and a cool lens to look at power and shifts in power and power structures. But I think of I always try. If I take a side on something, I always try to at least be familiar with the points on the other side. And one of those, recently that keeps coming up is, these police and, what if the police don't have enough money? What are we going to do? We give them more money than most nations' entire military, but, what if we've got to fund these police? It just seems a little bit wild to me that, how can you see that much money going to the police and not have some questions when there's like such gaping problems?
Yeah, well, that's just the manufactured consent machine has worked very effectively.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, it's hard. I wish I knew better how to like get how to like wake people up to certain things, and that's like I think to me right now the biggest one. Is the way, especially locally, most of the stuff I kind of am keeping an eye on in terms of local government has to do with policing, and it's not usually good. But there's some positive things that have been happening, and we've got I think at least in the center of the city we've got a good group of political actors doing good things. But to get back to the sort of free will issue, I guess. I don't know. I think that even having, I just think that like humans are inherently flawed. And I think it's because, we can talk about lack of free will when we're within a restrictive structure. But then if that structure falls apart, and it's like there are no rules. If the White House is nuked overnight, and we're just here alive, and we have to now find a way to stay that way, and they're like the rules go out the window, then it's like, well, then what? How do you? And I think structuring power in any way is just inherently difficult, and humans are just inherently messy and inconsistent, and we like to think we're rational, but we're very emotional. And I don't think that there's I think that it's like the free will that screws us up. I think it's the fact that we have free will. I think if we didn't have free will, there wouldn't I think be well, I don't know. Maybe I can't say that. I think maybe you're right, and maybe it's just like looking at it as free will or not doesn't matter as much as the effects of looking at individual agency.
Yes, and I think that's more so the point. I think getting too bogged down in the sort of binary of free will or no is not necessarily the point, but more so that the effects of which and having a entire society built around
I'm curious to know
Christian values built.
Has this been tried somewhere?
Well, I don't know, but
I'm curious if there was
But I mean, this is sort of a analytical structure of metamodernism is something that. But yeah, we've been talking for a long time, so I mean, I don't know of a good way to tie a bow on all of that, but
yeah, well, and because I guess I like the notion of if you're using that framework to redesign a government and economic system, which God willing, we might be having to be tasked with in the near future. But I think there does have to be a shift. And, what sucks to me is seeing, what makes me feel powerless is not thinking that I have free will or don't. It's like learning about how the Supreme Court works. And then I'm like, and oh God, this is where our laws come from. It's these people. And I'm like, and there's such a structure to get them to ever even be in the Supreme Court. And just the political machines are so huge and convoluted that it's just overwhelming, but I think we're seeing it start to, if not fall apart completely, something's happening, right?
Earlier you said that what if the White House was nuked or something? It's it's been nuked. It's been nuked since the 80s, and
yeah,
and we don't actually know what we're doing, and none of the people for generations have actually known what they've been doing, but they've just been doing, and just it keeps going, I guess. But it is chaos. And
yeah, and it's hard to have a conversation like this and not mention something like the Matrix because it's an easy analogy, but I don't know. I think about this sometimes where this notion that we would need a simulation to be controlled, I think is wild. I'm like, no, I don't think all we needed was just somebody to have a head start. That's all it takes to be okay, now I'm the boss and you do this. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. And I think that's essentially what happened to humanity. We just whoever gets too much power can't seem to wield it humanely. And the cycle repeats.
Yeah. And maybe it kind of goes back to something I said a while back ago of just decentralized morality. How much can we both as individuals but also together do things that make the world a better place without any sort of formalized thing that tells you that if you touch your dick you're going to hell.
I read, I want to say it was Kwame Ture, which is probably not even pronouncing that right, but how one of his biggest critiques of the American education system is that it actually seemed to discourage people citing direct sources. And so, he kind of used this example of, you can ask an American college student how they feel about, Nazism or Adolf Hitler, and they will, give you a firm negative answer. and I'll be like, what were his views? Have you read any of his works? And I'm like, well, no. And he's like, and it's like, the point isn't that he's, got some good points, but that, there's a lot of what we call education isn't actually education. There's a lot of, anything that we're calling a thing usually isn't really that. There's, the words are so inadequate to describe the experience, and so that's why I'm staunchly on the side of free will, and in most, conversational contexts, right? Because I think it just feels like I'm a wild animal trying to navigate this insane place where people are doing insane things. And, even though I feel like I'm getting old, I feel like I'm kind of just making sense of things and just understanding my place and everything. And, I think all I can really try to do is hopefully act in such a way locally that it improves the locale, because I've got big doubts about you expand much further out of the locality, and like, I don't know what's going to happen, even just like watching this Russian invasion and, the ripple effects where, it has on markets and, and how we don't have money to do just about anything. And there's more homeless people or unhoused people, excuse me, on the streets than I have ever seen with my own eyes. And we're like, there's just billions for war. We got that anytime. It all it just seems like this weird game of the rich that we have very little say in. So I think I am very much in line with our agency keeps getting restricted, but I have to rely on us having some amount to hope that the good guy can like win in the end, even if that's childish.
I will at least try and tie a bow on all of this to just say like, think globally, act locally, that sort of thing. Of the closer you get to yourself, the more things that you have the power over. So like, if you can vote, I cannot, but if you can vote, like, do so. And that is at least something that you can do. Yeah.
And that's, it's easy to read books and think about like these ideas, right? But unfortunately, the starting place is always right here, right now. Yeah. And like, usually your ideas are pretty far away from right here, right now. That's why they're ideas. And so that's why I kind of have to, I will obsess over the global politics sometimes. I have to be like, no, like what? Don't need to, like, we need to fix this place first. Sure, there's, I can torture myself over all of the evil shit happening in Palestine and everywhere else, and Yemen and all this stuff's going on right now that like just nobody even cares about because of Ukraine. It's just mind flowing. But like sickly predictable, and it's like you just have to go around knowing that about humans, and I hate it. So yeah, it's a wild time.
Just like finish your album. It's fine.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Just like take all these weird feelings and rants and put it somehow into music and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, we're musicians. Anyways.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a wild ride.
Where can we find you and your things?
Instagram, fifth of Hanon, excuse me, Gonzo LeBronzo, and Neon Cathedral. Neon is spelled with a 0. Generally, have stopped using Facebook or anything else, and that's anything we do you can find from Instagram. So
yeah. So thank you once again. I'm Santiago Ramones.
I'm David Hanon.
What song is playing at the end of this?
I guess we do Water.
You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music and produce audio. The music you're hearing now is music I made. You can listen to official releases by Santiago Ramones on Spotify, Apple Music, and the other streaming places. Or you can support me directly by buying my music on Bandcamp. I'm working on Hypothetical, my first singer-songwriter album, so if you'd like to hear that at some point, there are lots of ways to support me on my website. There's a Discord server in which we discuss deep topics from the podcast, but it's also a community of beautiful human beings. All the links to all my things are on my website, santiagoramones.com. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It would mean a lot to me to hear what you have to say, and it lets others know what to expect, better than I could ever explain. I want to help the world have deeper conversations, so thank you for listening to and supporting Bit Depth. I was in the podcast for my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.